You have just written a short article on Ukraine, and Ukraine has gotten, I think, the spotlight taken away from it, obviously, with what's
Yeah.
happening, to Gaza right now. But a lot of developments have been occurring. There was the Zlochinski interview in The Economist talking about how we're at a stalemate. There's going to be no breakthroughs. There have been no breakthroughs. You also just wrote a piece about what's been going on. I'll pull it up in Strategic Culture, where you talk about how Kiev's military is collapsing, but it isn't over yet. And you talk about this leaked report from the Ukrainian Armed Forces talking about just the utter horror that was the counteroffensive that's now over. But I'm wondering if you could talk about the situation in Ukraine, where things are, why is it still significant to, given what all that's going on in the Middle East, in Gaza right now?
I'm getting a fantastic information via leaked documents from the Ukrainian Armed Forces. This column is the first one. I'm writing a new one today, which is probably going to be out this weekend, talking about the Kharkov front. This one was basically about Zaporozhye front as well. So all over the front lines, the whole thing is collapsing. So these are the facts, and not only the Russians know that, even the Polish military media is talking about it. So, and obviously people in NATO who have a brain, they know about it as well. And obviously, when you read Zaluzhny's interview, basically he's saying we're going to have to fight really hard not to lose more territory. This is the message. In fact, obviously, the Economist could never redact it like this, but this is essentially was the message. The problem is the sweaty sweatshirt is absolutely terrified because he knows he's already being thrown under the bus. It has already started. When you have the Washington Post talking about it, when you have the New York Times talking about it, when you have a cover story in Time, you're fucked. And he knows it. The thing is how this is going to proceed in the next few months. From one of my Washington sources, in fact, the chatter is it's going to happen within the next 3 months. The thing is they don't know exactly how yet. And yes, Zaluzhny is a serious candidate. So no wonder Zelensky already started let's try to purge Zaluzhny show. We're already seeing that. Zaluzhny is very popular in Ukraine. So if there was elections, for instance, tomorrow and Zaluzhny would run, he will win it. Everybody knows that. Zelensky's popularity is probably less than 10%. Real popularity. The thing is this going to change what's happening and will continue to happening on the front lines? No. What changes from a Russian point of view is how far will we go next year? Is there going to be an offensive? Are we just going to recover areas in Donbass? Are we going to cross the Dnieper? The famous Odessa stratagem, what it's going to be, all the way to to Transnistria. But this is all up in the air. There's a lot of discussion in military channels in Russia about that. No conclusions, of course. The only things that they know for sure is that the momentum is on the Russian side. They can do anything they want for the next few months, not necessarily involving an offensive. They can recover territory, but there's going to be a sort of protracted stalemate for quite a while. And at the same time, they know very well that the Americans are when I say Americans, the current people in charge and the White House, National Security Council, machinery of government, etc. They are desperate for a ceasefire. And the Russians, they are not desperate for anything. the only ceasefire, and Lavrov already said, Lavrov was never saying that before, about a month or 2 months ago. Now he's saying it almost all the time. This war will be decided on the battleground. So this means the Russians decide when the war is over or not. They impose the conditions, and everything involves total Kiev surrender. That's it. There's no ceasefire. If the ceasefire does not work along these lines, there won't be a ceasefire, because the Russians can prolong this thing for years if they want it. They are running a full tilt military economy as we speak, and they are running I would say partially militarized civilian economy as well. They are growing. They have no problems with sanctions. You go to Moscow, like I was in Moscow until months ago or so, you find everything, the best of the West you find in Moscow in front of you. So the only thing that they complain, it's very complicated to get a Schengen visa to go to Europe. So what? You pay somebody, and in the end, you get your Schengen visa. And you even have middle-class Russians who live in the Urals or live in Siberia. They come here they have a Schengen visa for 3 months. They go to Spain. They come here to France as well. So it's not a big deal. Even for these people who are, I would say, relatively critical of the SMO. And for the majority of the population, they don't even care, because the West, for them, they look at the West and they see literally, their opinion now of the West, and I could generalize it to an overwhelming majority of the Russian population as a whole. I'm not talking only urban Russia, big cities. I'm talking Russia as a whole. And it goes all the way to the Far East, goes all the way to the Sakhalin Islands, to give you an idea. They look at the West and say, it's really a bunch of barbarians. And they wanted to do what Napoleon and Hitler wanted to do to us, and now via NATO. And we are prevailing again, obviously, because obviously these assholes in the West never listen to Bismarck. Do anything you want, but don't pick a fight with Russia, which is exactly what they did. So in terms of internal stability of Russian society, no problem. There are serious issues concerning these oligarchs doing back and forth between Russia, and should Russia welcome them back or not? What is the price for them to come back and start living in Russia again and investing in the Russian economy? So this is all up in the air, and of course depends on the relationship between these oligarchs and the Kremlin and the security services, of course. So I think this will be judged on an individual basis, all of them. Like the case of Mikhail Friedman, the head of the Alpha Group, which I'm sure many of you remember the story, recent story, fantastic. He was billionaire, oligarch, exiled in London. He decided to go to Israel, and then Al-Aqsa flood happened, and he was caught in the airport with his Russian passport, boarding a flight to go back to Moscow. It's a fantastic story. And he has serious issues because for many people in the security agencies, in the intel apparatus, they look at this guy, he was financing Ukrainian operations. No, he cannot just come back here and live like he. No way. There's got to be a serious investigation, etc. So individual cases, right? So the options open for Russia for the next few months, let's say, are quite open. And then, very important, it's what Shoigu said a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken, like 3 months ago. The special military operation will end in 2025. So it's already planned. Whatever happens next year, they already have a date. And Shoigu himself spelled it out. So what's going to happen the whole of 2024 when Russia is presiding BRICS, when there's going to be American elections at the end of 2024? Obviously, they are taking all that into the chessboard considerations. And then they probably they're the 2, 3 the top 3, 4, 5 scenarios said, okay, so maybe beginning of 2025 we have our optimal scenario, and then we can say that this thing is I wouldn't say over, but at least okay, let's put it on the side and let's concentrate on other stuff, because they know that NATO will keep going after Russia in different parts of the post-Soviet space or Eastern Europe, you name it. But the particular Project Ukraine chapter could be more or less sidelined. So this is the situation at the moment. So the mood in Moscow is very relaxed, Danny, and all of you. Really, it's relaxed, which was not a few months ago. I remember very well when I was there in March, April, it was very, very tense. But after the non-counter offensive, the whole thing turned upside down completely.
Yeah, it seemed that there was an assumption that this counteroffensive, I mean, it was being hyped up that there would be an incredible pouring of resources. I mean, there was a pouring of resources.
It was,
potentially it could do some damage, but the damage has been mainly, if not entirely, falling at the feet of Ukraine and, of course, NATO. And so you mentioned that this overall objective in the former Soviet space, this aggression toward Russia will continue.
Mm-hmm.
Where exactly could it continue? Because Ukraine, as things start to fade into the background, as we're already witnessing with this particular project, as I've said in other streams and conversations, the objective against Russia that NATO, the United States at the lead has, is not going to fade into the background.
Of course not.
So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about where things might go next.
They have so many options, Danny. They are already considering how to militarize the Baltics. And the Russian response was fantastic. Oh, yeah, you're going to do it? Okay, so we are going to militarize the Baltics. I know it's childish, but these people think like kids playing in their sandboxes. And the Russians have to respond them in a very blunt way, always. No? Azerbaijan, for instance, Armenia, they can try something with Armenia, but Armenia is too small, too weak, and it's not going to influence substantially anything inside Russia. Well, what's going to happen? Armenia is going to exit the Eurasian Economic Union, for instance. It's a small economy. It doesn't make any difference. And Armenian businessmen will never allow that. There are a lot of Armenian businessmen doing excellent deals with Russia, back and forth. They won't allow any government to expel them from basically a free trade zone. Okay, Central Asia is very complicated. I'm going to Kazakhstan next month. Among other reasons, I want to dig deeper into the extremely complicated Kazakh-Russian relationship in the Tokayev era. You know, I'm sure many of you saw that Putin went to Astana this week, meeting with Tokayev. They signed a lot of deals, etc. He said that Putin said that the relationship is evolving comfortably, his own words, but this is not the true story. It's very complicated. And for instance, there are a lot of Kazakh interests in Russia. There are a lot of business between Kazakh businessmen and Russia during sanctions. The Kazakhs are terrified. When I mean the Kazakhs, the government in Astana is terrified of secondary sanctions. So they apply restrictions and sanctions to a lot of products that transit through Kazakhstan and then end up in Russia. Not all of them, but a substantial amount. And obviously the Russians look at that and said, oh, look, what the hell? You're part of the Eurasian Economic Union. You're part of the Belt and Road. You're part of the Greater Eurasia Partnership. We're going to put you into BRICS next year, and you treat us like this? So this is very, very tricky as well. So I hope I'll have some more deep insights over there. I'm going to Astana and Almaty next month after Russia. So this will be fascinating. So I have to keep going back to Central Asia at least twice, 3 times a year, because it's crucial for the development not only of Eurasian integration, but to identify where the Americans are going to attack next, because they will. Everybody knows they will. When I was in Uzbekistan, I didn't see any opening for them in Uzbekistan. There are a lot of American businesses in Uzbekistan, of course, but it's I don't see any possibility of installing a sort of color revolution in Uzbekistan. Kazakhstan is more complicated, and because depending on how you manipulate, you navigate the forces in Astana, the different factions in Astana, and lots of Western interests, especially in the oil and gas business, you have the possibility of having a government that is going to be leaning your way. And the Americans won't give up. We know that. And Kyrgyzstan, of course, enormous problem. It's smaller. There's the Fergana Valley, which they can always cultivate what they did during the war on terror years, cells that can destabilize later the neighbors or Kyrgyzstan itself. So Central Asia, we have to be focused on it, full time.
Yeah, how quickly it was forgotten that a month before the special military operation launched,
yes,
a month and a half, Kazakhstan was the target of.
You remember the coup in
revolution.
January? The coup was in January, exactly. 1 month before the SMO, exactly.
1 month.
Yeah,
and Russia, of course, stepped in with the the
they
security.
saved Tokayev, Danny. The Russians were there in less than 48 hours. They saved the Kazakh government.
It was over very fast, and,
exactly.
mostly everyone forgot.
Yes.
And that's how effective it was. And then the SMO happened. And one last question on the Ukraine situation before we move on to the Belt and Road Forum. I wanted to ask you about, a lot of people make the comparison between Ukraine and Israel. A lot of people, especially now that Israel is conducting this bombardment. You've had Zelensky even compare Ukraine.
He compared it, right? He said that Ukraine is going to be the new Israel.
As the new Israel of Europe, essentially. Could you give me your thoughts on this comparison and whether it's significant or not, how we should all be viewing this? Because, Colombia has often been viewed as like the Israel of Latin America, for example. Is there some basis to this? And what does it mean
because
for geopolitics?
No, in the case of Colombia, forget it. Colombia is a South American swinging country. It's they mock gringos all the time, especially Americans. This could never become an Israel in South America. South America is and there are many South Americans, and even if the history of colonization was more or less the same everywhere, but the national peculiarities are endlessly fascinating, starting with the accents, starting with their view of life, starting of how playful they are vis-a-vis life, starting with different levels of sense of humor, which is something that you find in Colombia a lot. It's not by accident that they have a guy like Garcia Marquez as one of their best writers. Garcia Marquez was a genius, not only in historical terms, in terms of writing, but he had a fantastic sense, a fabulous sense of humor, which is something that the Chileans, for instance, don't have it. It's just something that the sense of humor in Argentina is completely different. They have it, but it's completely different. Not to mention Cuba. Cuba is fantastic. And Cuba has been, they fought the big guy all these years, and they still prevail. So, there's the element of national pride as well, which is fantastic as well. So this any ideology from the global north from the so-called Holy Land will never flourish in South America. Ukraine is different, because the Ukraine, you have to get into the Kzar Empire, which are several levels of understanding that they are the precursors of what's happening now with Zionism, and in many aspects they are not as well. Nowadays, there is, I would say, more or less a common ideology between Zionism and what these people around the sweaty sweatshirt, the neo-fascists and neo-Nazis, are doing. So it's an equation of Ukrainian neo-Nazism and Zionism. And there's no question about that. But the historical roots of all that is much more complicated. And then we will need a long academic discussion about the Kzar Empire, which is not as clear-cut as many people think. They are all Khazars. No. It's much more complicated. And because it involves miscegenation of different empires in Central Asia and between the Caspian and the Black Sea and all. That's an extremely complex, fascinating field of study, but extremely complex. But nowadays, yes. So when you have the sweaty sweatshirt himself saying that this is the new Israel, I think he killed it with one formulation, considering the way they think in Tel Aviv and in Kiev. But this is only applied to the moment we are living. It could change in the next generation, for instance. It could change if we have a next generation of Ukrainians who are not driven by hate and understand their role in the post-Soviet space and in the fact that they can interact with their Russian neighbors instead of demonizing them, which is exactly what they're doing in terms of the Israelis. And most of the I'm very sorry to say, at least 70% of the population, if not more, according to recent polls, demonizing Palestinians as infrahumans.
Yeah.
So the language that you hear in Tel Aviv and you hear in Kiev is the same.
Yeah, and certainly when Zelensky talks like this, it certainly expresses a real ambition, one that it seems to be maybe far-fetched now, given that Zelensky's, you talked earlier about Netanyahu and throwing under the bus. I mean, Pepe, Netanyahu is a mainstay in Israeli politics. He's been around for a long time. Zelensky is temporary. Zelensky is very temporary. That coup happened in 2014. It was, of course, building up before then, but the coup didn't happen until 2014. People like Netanyahu have been in politics for decades as part of the Israeli process. So it's the Israeli colonial process. So it certainly is much different, but certainly we can learn a lot from what Zelensky says, for however harebrained he may be. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.